All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've already got 4 people watching. So 1, thank you so much for tuning in. And 2, a shout out to our new Patreon members. We have Defender Brandon and Fighters Maxwell and Foster. You guys, thanks so much for being Patreon supporters and helping us to continue to do this awesome stuff. I am super excited to welcome a pretty awesome individual. She has significantly improved my writing abilities as a young indie author, and I am super blessed to have gotten to link up with her and have her as my editor. So everyone, I would like to introduce you to Catherine Dunn. And Catherine, if you would, go ahead and introduce yourself to us.
Hi, well, I've been editing since 2015. So that's how long now? Like 8 years now, nearly. Yeah, so that's what I do in my day-to-day job. I'm so lucky to get to do this for a living.
Very cool. So, Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about your background, like where you grew up, where are you now, and kind of what got you into the career field of being an editor?
Oh my, well, I've always lived in the county of Leicestershire in England. So I've only ever grown up in this sort of quite small area. Yes, I'm, as you can tell, English. I've been saying that I'm going to try and slow down and talk super clearly, in case a lot of people listening are in fact American. So yeah, I hope I don't come across too unclear. So yeah, so I'm English. Before I was an editor, I'm kind of doing this back to front. I worked in admin, so kind of your standard office type job, I guess. I learned to read ridiculously early, I can't even remember it. And I've always been an avid reader, keen to read and write. And English was my talent subject at school, the subject that I was good at. But for some ridiculous reason, I decided to study arts, just because it was a lot of fun. And then I just got this fairly boring office admin job with local administration. And by the time I was about, how old was I? 36. I was not, my job was okay, but it was not really inspiring. And I started to do this proofreading and editing training on the side in the evenings and build up a little client list from there. And sort of went into it full time a year or 2 later after my daughter was born. So yeah.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you kind of found yourself the perfect job where you love to read and now you get to basically read and assist others for full-time work.
Exactly, yeah. It's so much more interesting than I've done a variety of jobs. Like when I was a student, I did different holiday jobs here and there. I tried getting into the artistic side with things like sign making, graphic design, and stuff like that. But I just didn't really find my niche, I guess, until I was quite old. So yeah, I just feel lucky that I can get up and actually love what I do, and like to sit down and be happy that I'm doing this job, even if I'm not necessarily inspired by the actual book itself. I just still love being able to, do this for a job and make someone's writing better.
Right. No, that's awesome. And I think that's a great segue into what I'm kind of curious on is what is the daily life of an editor? I mean, I know from a writer standpoint, I wake up, I start to get into the manuscript, I try to get creative. But from an editing standpoint, what is kind of a daily routine for you?
Oh my, well, actually, this is going to be different between every editor you ask. So I can't really say, because the majority of, well, mostly a copy editor. I do some developmental editing too. But most editors these days are freelance. So it's the big publishing houses will probably have a pool of editors they employ, but most places now contract out to freelancers or recommend freelancers. So it's a very small percentage of editors will be working directly employed by a publisher. So when you work for yourself, your day can look like whatever you want it to. So it is as different as the person it is. So some people will get up at 6 o'clock every morning and be at their desk by 7, and they will do X number of hours and they'll clock off and have their evening. Whereas some people will be total chaos. And as long as they get the job done, their clients don't really care. I like to think I'm a bit of a happy medium in that one. So like every other week, I have my daughter with me. So those weeks tend to be very structured. So we have to get up for school and be there at a certain time, and then I'll settle down and start working and pick up at a certain time. And it's very routine. And then on my other weeks, it's total chaos. So it really depends on what I've got on, and I like to personally have at least 2, probably up to 4 jobs going at the same time, because I find if you're trying to do, if you're working on just one job at a time, makes me antsy, because I feel like after this is finished, I'm never going to work again, and I will starve to death. Whereas if I have more than 4 jobs this time, I start to feel like I'm losing my grip a little bit. So yeah, I try and keep it balanced, and it helps me to avoid the can't see the wood for the trees syndrome, where you can focus on the same book for so long, you can't see mistakes or problems. So I mix it up a bit. And a lot of editors say they can only fully focus for sort of 5 to 6 hours at a time on actual editing work itself, and then the rest of their working day they're doing sort of, maybe the accounts or marketing or CPD or something. I used to think that was rubbish, but now I think actually, yeah, that sounds about right to me. So I don't quite have, my brain's not quite as doesn't quite find it as easy to focus as I used to a few years ago. So I used to do 10, 12-hour days, and now I think, well, I don't really feel I could stay fully focused for 10 or 12
That's
hours.
interesting. Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I found myself very similarly when I wrote book 2. There were days where I wanted to push myself, and I did 10,000 words a day for 3 days straight. And of course, 10, 12 hours, I was exhausted. Whereas now there's days where I almost have to look for those writing sprints of just get in there, get 1,000 words, and then step away and kind of decompress from the manuscript. So that's interesting how it sounds like you're kind of in a similar situation of finding the right balance to step away from it.
I definitely have to break the day up and sort of, go do something for 10 minutes and then come back and that sort of thing. Yeah. I think a lot of people found that with the whole, can I say the P words? The pandemic? And more people working from home, having to deal with, actually it can be quite hard to focus when you're in your own space because there's always something to distract you.
Right.
So,
no, I think that's...
I find it working into the evenings, and I work on weekends and bank holidays and whatnot. So I kind of spread out my time across 7 days, almost 365 days a year. I will take things like Christmas Day off, or sometimes I'll just have a random day off. But generally, it's like 7 days a week. But then it might be fewer hours a day. So it's a trade-off.
No, I actually would absolutely agree with you on that, because I found the same thing where there's days where I've written 7 days straight. I think I've even gotten to 12 days straight of writing, and then I finally was like, okay, I need to take a break. And it sounds similar to you, where I was like, I just feel like I have to be engaged, I have to be working. So, I know when we found each other through a Facebook group, I Need an Editor, and that was an overwhelming experience for me, because as many indie authors, they go into the group and say, hey, I have a manuscript, I need an editor, and then you just get spammed messaged with 30 plus comments of people wanting to, vie to be your editor. But you really stood out in that group, and that's how I found you, how I selected you. And one of the things I really liked was when we first started communicating, you said, I want to allow you to continue to have your voice as an author. I want you to keep that voice. If there's any changes, I want it to complement the message that you're trying to convey. How do you come up with that? Like, how do you develop? Is there any temptation to ever be like, oh, I want to really take the reins on this manuscript?
I don't know. I feel like I'm quite laid back as a person, and that translates into as an editor as well. Like, some people really stress about these things, but I do feel like I want to do my best for the person, the author, the client. But at the same time, there comes a point when you're like, actually, this is not my problem. It's their book. You know what I mean? So, I can say my opinion, and I can say, well, sometimes, if I'm feeling this way about a certain thing, then the chances are other people, at least a segment of other people, will feel the same. But at the end of the day, it's very much your work, and I'm conscious that I've not put all those hours of writing time into it. And I think the fact that, sometimes I feel a little inadequate among editors because I'm not a published author myself. I'm not writing a book. I haven't written a book. I've not got one on Amazon that I can point to and say, here's my book. I'm also a writer. And a lot of editors are writers, and they sort of say, well, I understand your struggle. I feel your pain. And I can't do that. But I think sometimes it's kind of a good thing, because I'm not tempted to be like, well, I would do it better. You know what I mean? This is how I would want to do it, because it's not my book. If I want to write my book, I have to actually get up and write my book. It's, you're the one that's put all the hard work into it. But I feel like just reading through the book gives you a good feel for the author's voice and what they're trying to say. And it's kind of simple, basic stuff, really, in a way, that somebody who's writing like a gritty action novel, is going to have a different tone than somebody who's writing a romance or something. It's the voice needs to complement what the readers are going to be looking for, I think.
Right. That's a great perspective there. And, so let's try to capture some of this experience you have. We don't need to list off everything, but everything from fantasy, urban fantasy, dystopian, science fiction, horror, romance, paranormal, fantasy, steamy, and erotic romance, crime, thriller, mystery, cozy mystery, contemporary fiction, literary fiction, humor, satire. So far, you have over 169 titles with over 80 authors, if I remember counting correctly. Some of them are repeat customers, and some are even in multiple different genres. So that's a pretty huge accomplishment from the way I look at it. So congrats on that. That's incredible.
Oh, wow, thank you. You've fully read my portfolio.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where, as an author, when I came in, I wanted to really see, because as well, I mean, you've read my books and edited them. There's, some romance and some of their, like, some sub romance stuff. There's everything from action, a little bit where I wanted to convey kind of a philosophy and wisdom and insight. So when I read over your profile, you have a ton of different genres and experience. So that must be pretty interesting to see such a different, vast array of writing styles and flavors.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it, again, that's something I sometimes feel ambivalent about, because everyone always tells you to niche down and really focus. And like, if you want to edit, crime and thrillers, just advertise crime and thrillers or something like that, and really be the expert, the go-to person in that genre. So I often feel like I've done too much in a way. And a lot of that was quite early on as well, when I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was just, wanted to get as much as I could there on my portfolio. So I would just take on pretty much anything. Whereas now I think I've become a bit more discerning in a way, and kind of not in the exact books, but in the genres and stuff. And I've just naturally gained more experience in some genres than in others, with fantasy being one of them, sci-fi, and horror. And even I've started to get quite a few thriller titles recently as well. But I'm trying to maybe capitalize more on having experience in those areas now, rather than trying to do a bit of everything. Because it is pretty interesting, but I feel like it can also work against you, because people want someone who's really familiar with their genre.
Okay, that makes sense.
Especially if they're going to compare and talk about, other books in the same genre, and if you're not widely read, then you're going to come across a bit ignorant. You know what I mean? So,
No, that's something I would have never even thought of, really. But yeah, absolutely. If you have someone who's wanting someone who's well versed, then obviously you need to be read in that. So let's go to our chat. Richie Stevens, Ayo, what's up, Big Richie? Thanks for stopping by and hanging out. And then our first question, which is, I think, one that we had written down, coming from John A. Douglas. Catherine, what's your favorite genre to read and edit?
I'm going to sound like I'm bootlicking now, aren't I? But I would say fantasy, just because to me, it's like, it's fun, pure fun. It's like escapist. You can have like a message, like a moral even. But to me, it's pure fun. Like, I think all reading is escapist in a way, obviously. But again, fantasy is a varied genre as well, so it can be quite urban and gritty, or it can be quite lyrical and romantic or something. So it's quite varied in itself. It'd be a hard push to me though, because I like lots of different genres and I'll kind of devour everything. I love literary fiction as well, and horror, crime, thrillers. That's my main core at the moment of reading. But I think fantasy probably comes out on top for me at the moment anyway.
Is there any favorite authors that you've just really enjoyed reading throughout the years that you kind of follow and always pick up their work?
Oh, actually, not that I follow as such. Recently, I've been trying to, on a kick, to read more current fiction. So I've been asking for recommendations and stuff. And I started on the Kingkiller Chronicles. So I've read the first book of that, and I want to read the second, and I believe the third one is never going to exist, probably, is it? I've resigned myself to that already. I've read the classics in the genre, like the Tolkien, Terry Pratchett, David Eddings and people like that, and Anne McCaffrey. I always feel there's so much I want to read that I almost never read a book twice. Which I don't know whether that might hold me back in some ways, but yeah, I just sort of I'm always wanting to try new things and keep up with sort of contemporary writers as well. And it's really hard when you do it for a living to find time to do it for pleasure as well.
Okay, so I guess that's a curious question. You're spending all day editing and you're still reading. Like, I feel like I would get burned out if I'm doing that, but you still seem to have this passion for it.
I've had to really make an effort this year. In fact, it's been one of my sort of, I don't really do New Year's resolutions, but I thought I really need to actually read for pleasure and read in the genres I edit in. Otherwise, I'm not going to become a better editor. Yeah, everyone, you need to do that. You need to be familiar with the market, if you like, what's fashionable even among publishers and that at the moment, on trends and what people are reading, not so that you can try and forecast what's coming next, because that's a fool's errand, but just to be a good editor, to know styles and points of view, and just what's in the mix right now, and also in the past as well. Like, obviously, writing style of 200 years ago, very different. But what are people pulling from the past now and using now, and how things go in cycles and fashions and styles in writing change, and just to be well-rounded in the areas you work in. And so I've really kind of had to make a real effort, and I think I've read about about half a dozen books so far this year, which is nothing compared with, some people will get to half a dozen books in a couple of weeks. I just don't know how I do it. But I do have other hobbies as well, and I try and make time for them too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, let's see here. What is the hardest part of being an editor? And granted, I know it may be different for some editors, but at least for you, what would you say is the hardest part of being an editor?
For me personally, looking at the whole picture, without a doubt, it's marketing. Marketing myself, promoting myself as an editor, and getting my name out there, and actually getting the job. I love, when I have a project on, I love doing the work, no question. Even if it's the driest, most academic title in the world, I love doing the work, but I cannot stand marketing and promotion, and I'm pretty terrible at it. Somehow, by some miracle, people still hire me, and I never know how and why, and I just feel completely out of my depth at this whole marketing thing. So I read books about how to market your business, and I try and network and be in all the right places, and do the right things, and I constantly feel on the back foot, and I don't enjoy it at all. Yeah, so, and it is part of the job at the end of the day, like doing the account. I mean, some editors will say they hate doing accounts and finances and mathematical side of things. So it will vary. And some people hate being self-employed, and they don't like the isolation of working in a space by yourself.
Right.
I mean, that can be hard for some people, but personally, that suits me. So, yeah.
I know. I've definitely tried to boost you and connect you with other authors. Whenever I see them, like, hey, I need someone. It's like, I got the perfect person for you. But then, of course, as we started our live, as Catherine and I were talking and scheduling, hey, when do we want to do our interview? I think it was like a week later. I was like, wait a minute, what's your schedule? I want to make sure I get my manuscript into you before anyone else tries to come and pick you up. So.
Yeah, it can be varied. Sometimes I'm booked up for a few months, and sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing next week. Yeah, it can really vary. But in terms of actually sitting down and working on books, I mean, I can honestly say, like, I'm always a fear is hovering over your head that you're going to get a horrible client. Somebody who's just really unpleasant to work with and for. And actually, that has not happened to me yet. I've never been working with someone who's really made the actual process unpleasant for me, luckily.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, and I feel like you've done such a wonderful job, and I've loved having you be my editor. You even did something that really surprised me, was you kind of made a world Bible almost, where you sent me an Excel sheet and, hey, here's every single character, here's where they were, here's every single battle you referenced and location of the battle. And I was just like, wow, this is awesome. I feel like not a normal editor would do such a thing, but you did it, just out of the kindness of your heart, I feel like.
Well, it's kind of, and that's kind of where my training came in as well, because I think that's what I would call the style sheet. And
Yeah.
you are supposed to do that. It is all professional practice, and it was something that was brought up in my training. And as part of the training, we were taught, you do this. It's got things on, like, just for people who aren't familiar with this, the spellings of words, like, I mean, certain, like, is bloodbath one word, 2 words, or does it have a hyphen? Does it matter? Probably it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter that you keep it consistent. So you just pick one and stick with it, and that goes on the style sheet. And any words like that, there's no right or wrong, but it needs to be consistent. And it's the same with things like names. So character names go on there, place names, battle names, just to make sure that you're getting them consistent throughout. And characteristics of the characters. So if you describe someone as like big, well-built, and like calm, placid natured on page 17, and then on page 77, you're describing them as skinny and grumpy. You have to kind of be on the alert for that. So
yeah, those Weight Watcher diets, can really affect some characters as you go throughout the book.
Yeah, actually, that does make sense, actually, that he's become skinny and grumpier as the book's gone on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen that often, actually, but you do sometimes get like eyes being a different colour later on in the book than they were earlier on, and you think, okay.
Is that probably one of the most common things that you've seen when you edit, is that sometimes the writer will forget some of those descriptions? Or what would be like some of the most common errors that you see, I don't know, stand out to you?
Most common errors are probably commas, to be honest. I don't know if anybody actually knows what you do. I don't even know whether I sometimes know exactly what you, and editors will argue for hours behind the scenes about what you do. There are rules about commas, but there are also parts where you can say, well, actually it doesn't matter that much, or it's kind of, it depends. It depends. So yeah, they are the most often thing that people are shaky about, and they are one of the most trivial things. So you spend a lot of time moving them about, taking them out, putting them back in different places. Yeah, I mean, as a punctuation, you have a good idea what it's for and where it goes. But commas, just like this, just sprinkle them around a bit. So yeah, well, that's the most common grammatical thing that people are going to be shaky on, I think, really. And in fiction, there are actually far fewer rules, hard and fast rules, than people often think there are as well. That's not to say there are none. There are still some rules, but you can bend them a lot more in fiction.
Okay. Interesting. Yep. So John is commenting and says, editors help make us better writers, even when they tell us what we don't want to hear. That is so true. And I know I would say probably the hardest part, one of the hardest parts when I'm writing, is the first 2-3 days when I get the manuscript back from you. And you open it up and you see red and you're just like, I'm a terrible writer. And you have to get through it. And then you're like, okay, yeah, we're okay. We're doing good.
It kind of looks kind of awful the first time you send something back. It's always covered, word track changes as well. It's always covered in red. I mean, I do turn it off for certain types of change so it doesn't get too ridiculous. Some editors turn it off for more changes than I do, actually. But then I think you're not going to learn anything if you don't see the changes I've made. So, but it's really not that scary. And as I say, half of them are commas anyway. But yeah, it's I feel like you have to be honest with people, not sugarcoat things too much, but not be rude. You know what I mean? That's the balance. I mean, personally, I find it hopefully not too hard to get that balance. I think in general people take it in the spirit it's meant, and I try and inject a bit of humour in that into comments sometimes, if I feel the person's right up for that, depending on the context. But yeah, I think people can generally tell when you're trying to be helpful, and I try and frame it as like, this is how it can come across to readers, not necessarily this is how it, this is how it should be, and I'm laying down the law type thing. But if you put it this way, it could make people feel a certain kind of way. So
right. And as I think back to the 2 manuscripts we've worked together on, and soon to be a third, one of the things I really liked too was not all your comments were negative, right? Or not negative, but not editorial. Some of it was instructional of, hey, TJ, this is why you should phrase it like this. This is what the rule is. So you definitely helped me as a better writer understand, because I remember when I first started out, I had no idea what third person narrative was. So just the points of view and past tense, present tense, a lot of these things, because those were all the things I struggle with in schooling. And you were very... Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I try and be sort of helpful without teaching granny to suck eggs, like I don't want to be patronising, but just provide explanation if it will be helpful. Points of view, I think everyone knows what tense is, even if they don't realise they know. But that's always a tricky one, because I'm never quite sure whether someone's given their point of view deep consideration and spent hours deciding that they're going to use this, whatever they've chosen, or whether they just haven't got a clue what it even is. So you kind of, I don't always know what the starting point is. Yes, and again, it's not something you can make a rule about either. It's like head hopping. Head hopping is this thing you're always told not to do, but there's no law that says you can't. It's just frowned upon, should I say.
Right. Well, I think that was one of the things you asked me at the very beginning when we first started was, hey, what tense are you going with here? Because you flip back and forth. And I'm like, I don't know. So.
Yeah, the tense is usually self-explanatory, and it's usually past. But sometimes you can drop into a sort of present tense, kind of like stream of consciousness. The main character's thought kind of flow along in the present tense, so you can switch tenses. It's but usually if people are starting off in past tense, they continue in past tense.
Right. Well, that's where in my most recent manuscript that I'm going through revisions on, which is my new series, it's a first person past tense. But as I went through the second pass of my revision, I realized 3/4 of the way through the book that I switched from past tense into present tense. So I had to go through like that whole 3rd quarter of the book and just change it all. It's like, oh, this is so much time.
You can switch between chapters and sections as well. Again, there's no rules for that. You can. Present tense can be a bit more immediate and catch the reading up in the flow. And there's a bit of a fashion for it as well in things like young adult at the moment. But sorry, John, just laughing at John's comment.
Present tense, past tense, I'm writing intense.
Yeah. But yeah, I think writing in present tense, those things are sort of ongoing all of the time. It can get quite, it can feel quite intense, quite rushed, and kind of a bit much after a while. So yeah, I think if you're going to switch between the two, it has to be for a balance, change of pace, that sort of thing. Sometimes you want to sort of get the reader properly into the moment and speeding along, and sometimes you want to get back and someone's recounting the story.
Right. Well, that was where in the first book of this new series, one of the things I started to realize with my writing was I was just having run-on sentences because I wanted the action and intensity to be very fast. I didn't want there to be breaks. And I was like, oh, no, this is wrong. You can still have intensity while having those sentence breaks.
Yeah, and sometimes I think chopping the sentences up shorter helps with that. I'm thinking, is it Lee Child who writes sort of action thrillers and really short, choppy sentences, and it sort of keeps the pace moving along. And then when you start to people writing long sentences, it's kind of more relaxing and lyrical. You know what I mean? So, but I think that, you have to mix it up a bit. Otherwise, whichever style you choose, if you stick to the same pace, it's going to get pretty boring. And for the reader after a while. Yeah. And yeah, I think you're going to mix it up and think about the scene and the action, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
John, that awkward moment when you've been writing for over 20 years and your editor points out you write multiple points of views in the same scene. So,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of, I'm always wary about point of view. It's like something that kind of needs to be mainly addressed in the dev stage, because if I try and unpick it all at copy editing stage, again, the kind of path if you get, nobody's ever asked me to do this before, but I could rewrite things from the same point of view or different points of view. But I think if you're at that point, you need to be taking a step back from copy editing, kind of going back to a kind of intermediary stage then between dev and copy. And I'd need to sort of work on that as a separate job altogether. And I could help people with that, but it will be a different type of work. It's kind of beyond copy or even line editing, and it's more of a specific thing. But nobody's ever asked me to help them with their point of view to that extent, to actually do the rewriting for them. But I feel awkward if I point out too much head hopping at copy editing stage. I'm essentially kind of saying, actually, I kind of think this needs to be rewritten, really. And then it's either, well, they can do it or they can ask me to do it. But it's kind of like actually take a step back here, and it's now a different type of job altogether.
Right. So that's a great question, because you've done development editing, you do copy line editing. Have you ever been asked to do both on the same book, or has it normally been, I'll do development editing and then they get someone else to do copy line? And if you've done both for a series, has that been hard to switch between those two mindsets?
Yeah, I've done both a couple of times. Once it was backwards. So I copy edited for someone, and then they came back to me after quite a long time, it could have been a year or more, and said, actually, I think this needs developmental work and I want you to do that. So I then did it that way around, and then I don't know what happened then to that. And then once, I think it's only once, I've done both. I think it's better if you get a different person to do each stage, because I'll see different things. But I think it's all right if there's enough time between it that you're not, you can't see the wood for the trees stage. But if there's 6 months or more between, if you've done developmental and they've gone away, worked on it for a few months, and then come back asking me to copy edit it, I would still do it. Because I think there's enough distance there to then just focus on the sort of, but I'm quite good at compartmentalizing and stuff like that. I think some people perhaps wouldn't feel they could do that or would want to do that, whereas I'm quite good at being like, I'm doing what you're paying me to do. I'm not going to get upset if you've not taken all my suggestions. I might grumble to myself, but at the end of the day, I made my suggestions, and it's up to you then whether you take them or not. I feel like I can it again quite objectively as a pure copy edit.
You actually just brought up a great point that another author and I were talking about maybe 3 weeks ago. And that was where the comment was made, I just want someone that I can give the manuscript to and they're just going to make it better. Almost like, hey, here's what I have now, just add to it and make it even better. And sometimes that's not really what an editor does, because at the end of the day, like you said, it's our book. So, when you kind of explain, I guess, maybe, you know, when you're done, it's really the author's decision of, do I want to accept these changes or not? And have you ever gotten pushback on that, or someone who expects you to basically rewrite their work for them?
No, I think I try and establish before we do anything whether it's developmental editing we want or line copy. So whether it's big picture stuff or or the grammar and that. So I try and get that clear. And if they want the big picture, the developmental editing, I do say right from the off that I don't rewrite it for you. I don't rewrite it for you. I think some developmental editors do and do that more, and are more interventionist than I am, and might physically move a chunk from here to there or whatever, shuffle it around and put their ideas into practice, you know, or add a bit here, take a bit away. Whereas I'm more like, I will tell you what I think are the problems and what I think could be done or should be done. I will try and tell you what works well as well, because I try not to be completely horrible all the time. But generally speaking, focusing on what doesn't work and why and what you can do about it. I'll leave comments on the manuscript, things that struck me on a first read. This is confusing, or what's this all about, or this seems out of character for this person or character. But I won't, John, I won't fix it, because that's your job, right, as the author. Yeah, it's your job to fix it. I will suggest that I'm not going to do it for you. If you want someone to do that, you need a ghostwriter or a collaborator or something. But what I will do sometimes is pull out anything from a few paragraphs to a few pages and rewrite those to illustrate a point. So, for example, there was one book I worked on where the point of view was a bit of an issue, and there were long passages where the point of view was nowhere. It sort of floated, and there were people talking, characters would have long passages of dialogue, and it would be so-and-so said, and then so-and-so else said, and where is the point of view even at this time? Yeah. Whose point of view are we in? And so I basically pulled those out, and I would say rewrite them maybe 3 times from different points of view to illustrate how that could be done. So I'm not trying to say that this is how it should be, but it's like, well, what point of view do you want to be in here? You know, here's what it could be like. Right. You decide. Yeah. So I don't really. I mean, I'm not averse to the idea of rewriting and helping them with the writing process, more like mentoring or book coaching or whatever that some people offer. But I've never been asked to do that. I haven't had a training in that sort of experience yet, so it's something I kind of have to build up to.
I know in book 1, when we were going through Hunters, there was at least 1 or 2 times where you had the comment, "Who's talking here?" Oh, yeah. I don't know. It could be one of the tigers or lions or something, you know.
Yeah, sometimes it just gets a little confusing. Yeah, and some people have the opposite approach where it's like every line it's so and so, but they can't use the word said. It's got to be like emoted or muttered or growled, you know, or snarled or something. They can't. It's like said is like this banned word. So like every line's got a tag telling you who said it, but you know they never just say it. And that's right. Kind of its own kind of opposite problem. It's almost like some English teachers told them in the past at school not to use said and think of alternatives, and they've really taken this to heart.
Yeah.
And now it kind of reads like a laundry list of the characters doing these different things.
I know one of the other things that I really liked was, you know, you would leave me comments even of like, hey, I really enjoyed this part of the book, or for the greater good, hot fuzz. You know, yeah. 1 or 2 phrases. And it was just really fun when you get to connect to your editor and some of those things, and you're going through that process.
Yeah, I feel like I tend to be a lot more. I mean, I like working on fiction better than non-fiction, although non-fiction's got its own, you know, areas that I enjoy. But I feel like when I'm working with non-fiction, I tend to be a lot more straight-faced and sort of, you know, not joking stuff around in the comments. And that tends to be when you're working for some like academics. And I feel like I need to be more serious with Professor so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so. I don't know why, because I'm sure they've got as much of a sense of humour as everybody else. I've got friends who are doctors and professors and stuff, and they're just normal people. But yeah, I don't want them to think I'm poking fun of like their life research. You know, whereas in fiction you can be a bit more light-hearted about like the greater good.
Right. Right.
And it's also kind of cultural as well, because I'm conscious that about half my work's writing in the US, but I'm not from there, so there are some things that are just going to pass me by, cultural references, and same as well that there are certain things that will spark something with me, like the greater good, that might not be as well known over there.
Yeah, it's, you know, I remember in our second manuscript with Injustice, you even mentioned one or two things of like, hey, I'm guessing this is an idiom or something because this is kind of foreign to me, but you know, it seems like it fits or whatnot. So yeah, we still were able to, you know, work with some of that, and it's been a fun exchange. I think one of the things too that you and I had talked about behind the scenes when we were leading up to our interview was really wanting to talk about AI and what we're seeing in recent things. Now, I know when before I hired you as my editor, and as I was going through the book, I had a Grammarly account that I used for the Air Force, especially with my emails, my memos, making sure it came off more professionally sound. But when I added the plugin to my Microsoft Word and I was trying to do creative writing, I wanted to throw my laptop through the window, and I was furious with it. What are some of your thoughts from an editor standpoint with AI and where we're going?
Yeah, it's been worrying a lot of my colleagues in editing. Actually, AI has been a hot topic of conversation, and some people are getting pretty nervous about essentially whether AI could do without a job. I feel like, well, we still haven't even managed to get spell check right yet, so you know that could be a ways off. But it's a legitimate concern. People have been saying, "Oh, I've had fewer clients because they just think they can bosh it all into AI and that's to do the job for them." I think it's more of an issue in academic circles, academic writing, because academic writers who are perhaps producing journal articles and things like that, and dissertations, that sort of thing, are not writers. That's not what they do. They are linguists or politicians, you know, political students or historians or biologists or something. So they don't have a passion to write. They have to because it's required of them. So they have to publish on it, and that's why they need editors, proofreaders. So they're not kind of so passionate about the writing process, and they basically want to save money, and they think, oh, you know, I'll put it in this program and it'll be good enough, and it'll be good enough for the journal. It'll meet their guidelines for, you know, decent grammar or whatever. Personally, I feel AI is still some way off being really good at that sort of thing. Could it work? Yes, it could. People are already using it. But for fiction, where my main interest is, I think it's not going to be as simple. And I think a lot of writers who are artists and passionate about process and want to write because they're creative people and they've created this world and the characters and the story, kind of look down on AI as, you know, it's like a painter. You can produce I've painted a hobby. You can produce a great image using AI. You can definitely produce a good enough image using AI, but it's not the same as the process of doing it yourself. And even doing it yourself with like real paint, a real canvas, and it's never going to be the same. And I think in fiction, I'm not saying everyone will always turn their noses up at it, because some creative writers are already using it, but they're using it in a different way, in the same way as artists use photography and artists use digital art. Writers will use AI, but it'll be another tool in the toolbox. It's not going to replace writers. It's not going to replace human editors, I don't think, fully. I do think we're going to have to adapt and learn and get some skills in like AI prompting and working with AI generated text. And a lot of editors have said they're not going to work with AI generated text. I think there's a lot of copyright issues around it at the moment that need to get straightened out as well. You know, with it sort of taking from different sources that have not given permission for that. And the same with image-based AI, and copyright issues galore still. So it's still very new.
Right.
But I think looking at it as a threat to our jobs and stuff is kind of to me, it seems like a really negative attitude that's not going to do us any favours. But I can understand why people feel uneasy about it. But I just feel like it's not a very can-do attitude, is it? I think we need to know, how can we work with this?
Right. Well, I think, one of the things that has been so beneficial to have you as an editor is not only are you teaching me, you're teaching me exactly what the rules are as I progress my writing. You're teaching me some of the different styles or whatever, but you're a different pair of eyes. And you, as we work together longer and longer, you get to know my voice more, my writing style more. And so, as you know, like when you're writing, you're so close to the manuscript that sometimes you can't step away and see the bigger picture. Whereas you are literally going through it and like seeing it from a totally different lens and perspective and can help the writer even more. Whereas I feel like AI can't even do that.
Yeah, I think it is going to improve. It has got a certain usefulness. I think we don't want to be complacent because technology is coming on leaps and bounds all the time. But at the same time, I think people have this weird attitude to AI. Like it's not just technology. It's this kind of thing to be feared. Like it's taking our jobs, kind of thing, like the Industrial Revolution and stuff. And it's like, look, the Industrial Revolution came and went, and things changed, and things will change. But we all still have jobs, and we're sitting here in front of a computer that couldn't have been dreamed of 200 years ago. But we're not sitting here with our loom in our house weaving anymore. Just the change is just unimaginable, and yeah, it will. But it's not. I don't think you can fear it. You have to kind of educate yourself about it as much as you can. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it, buy into it, go with it. But I think you can't be too negative about that sort of stuff, because it's going to happen, whatever you think about it. So I think just stay alert, really, and try and educate yourself about it.
Awesome. That's some great perspective there. Okay, so what advice would you give to authors who are going editor shopping? Are there certain questions that you feel like they should be asking, editors vying for the job? What are some things that authors can do to fish out potential authors who may not be the best fit for them?
I think that there's a few obvious things. Genre specialism. I mean, I said before about I feel like I've been a little bit too much jill of all trades maybe in the past. It's great for getting experience and it's a lot of fun. There does come a point when I feel like authors are looking for editors with expertise in their genre, so that's something you kind of need to look at their portfolio. And you liked my kind of more scattergun approach, which is great, but that works. Like that was what resonated with you. I mean, some people might want someone who's got almost purely fantasy on there, and not other things. So just get a sense. I think the person's vibe is like massively important. You can get that from their website. How do they communicate? I guess a sample. I mean, some editors do charge for samples. I don't, but some do, and that's not wrong. It's just different. It's fine. It's perfectly. If someone's charging for a sample, it doesn't mean they're not legit. It's just a different way of doing things, and they'll take that off the cost of the full edit if you go with them. The pricing, of course, obviously with their budget, chimes in with what you want, what you're after. It's hard to put your finger on, but I think ask lots of questions, and are they upfront, you know, are they upfront with answers? What's their kind of, how do they communicate with you? How does that chime in with the kind of personality you're looking for? Are they kind of chatty and jokey? Are they kind of very, very formal? You know, so even when people give you all the information, they've still got a different approach that you can sense in their emails and communication. And, you know, don't be afraid to ask to like chat on the phone or by Zoom as well. Some people don't like to do that, and that's fine. But, you know, if you want someone that's going to be prepared to talk to you on the phone and they don't want to do that, then you're just not a great fit. So,
right.
And, you know, it's just all sorts of things. Like, look on their website about them, and, you know, do they give you, you know, friendly impression, and, you know, what are their testimonials like and portfolio? What's their CV like? Yeah, you do have to be careful sometimes. There are elements of, like, if someone's massively cheaper than everyone else, again, you can't say people's approaches are so varied. You can't say something's right or wrong. I mean, they might be just starting out and trying to build experience. They might just be, like millionaires and just trying to be nice. You know what I mean? But, you know, there is sometimes an element of, like, there are certain sites you can go on and people will be offering to edit a full book for $50 or something. The chances are it's probably not going to be the greatest quality. But other than that, it's more of a personality thing, I think.
I think that's probably a great way to put it, because it has to be the right fit for you, your personalities match. And then there's times where, you know, you as an editor have got to tell this writer, hey, this may not be the right, you know, phrasing or whatever. And some writers may be very defensive, you know, whatever. So making sure it's a right fit is a huge key part of this.
Yeah, I think you have to go into it kind of knowing a little bit about what you want. So at least know whether you're looking for big picture or more fine detail stuff, rather than just being like, well, I don't really know. I just feel like getting edited needs to be the next step. I don't really know what type. So just like know a little bit about what you're actually asking them to do. I mean, are you wanting someone who will rewrite it for you if needed, or are you just wanting someone to polish the commas and make sure everything's spelled correctly, or anything in between? You know, it's so do try and have some idea of what you want. That's really helpful. I'm trying to think now, really. And yeah, you can't be too defensive. But as I say, I've not had anyone straight up be sort of rude to me about what I've said or anything like that. I think at that point, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into as a writer. And I try and reassure people, you know, don't worry about if there's lots of red pen or something. It doesn't mean your work is bad.
Right.
You know, a lot of it's just shuffling things about a bit. It just looks worse than it is. And also more edits doesn't mean it was a bad piece of writing to start off with, because sometimes someone can write something and it's grammatically very good, but it's as boring as anything. You know, so it doesn't necessarily mean they're a better writer.
Right.
You know, but yeah, I think I've only really had one person ever kind of push back on edits to the point where I said, well, this is a rule, as in this is how you spell this, and it isn't one of those it depends things. This is just the way it is. And they were like, no, I don't want that. I want it this way. And I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
You know,
it's your book. You know, you go
exactly.
for it.
Yeah. And I don't think they'd hired me for a few things actually, but I don't think they'll probably hire me again. But I just said what I had to say politely, and it's then up to them to do what they want. But I don't take it personally. You know, they weren't rude about it to me. They just disagreed with me, and I'm like, well.
Right. I think you also brought up a great point too, where sometimes authors, we get to this point of maybe exhaustion, maybe a little bit of desperation. Maybe it's the fact of, okay, we're done. We want to hand it off and we want it out to the public, where we may take the first name that we find and say, okay, you're the editor. Whereas, it's sometimes, hey, slow down and make sure it is the right fit for you. Go out and really find the editor that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions and push back on things if something doesn't seem right. I like to think I don't have these issues because I like to think I'm a good editor and one of the nice guys. But yeah, if something feels off, don't hesitate to query it for sure. Yeah, and I'm quite non-confident. I like to make people feel good about themselves and their writing, and yeah, I'm not here to get into arguments with people about the finer points of grammar, because that's just a waste of everyone's time. But yeah, I quite like it when the idea of, I just want you to make it nice and just get the job done. That quite fits with my sort of copy editing approach. Yeah.
So now also, oh yeah, you started out in 2015. If we have anyone that is looking at getting into the editing space and becoming an editor, you're a part of the Editorial Freelancers Association, and you are an advanced professional member of the CIEP. Is that something that you feel is a huge strength to your resume and experience? And is that something that you would encourage young aspiring editors to pursue?
Definitely. Well, the CIEP is British. I mean, it's got members from all around the world, so you don't need to be living here to join it. But it's something that's best known in the UK. The EFA is more, I think it's based in Canada, so it's more US and Canadian, more well known over there, and more likely to be joined by US editors and Canadian editors. And there are other national bodies around the world as well.
Sure.
But the CIEP I'm proud of, because it is quite stringent requirements to get in and get up the membership grade. Like, if you start off entry level, then you're an intermediate member, and then you're professional and you're advanced professional. But there are hoops you have to jump through to get to those levels. You can't just buy your way in. Even to intermediate membership, you have to prove that you've done, so there are a certain number of hours of experience. You have to get, if you've not worked for a publisher, you have to get references. If you've not worked for a publisher, you have to pass a test that they give you, which is quite challenging. So I revised for that test harder than I revised for GCSEs, I think. Yeah, so there's hours of experience. And training, you get a certain number of points for different training courses that you do. They don't have to be CIEP training courses, they can be from other organisations. But yeah, you have to prove, and for each level you have to have more. So training, references, experience, and you've got to prove that you've done all of that. And it's quite a lot of experience and training you have to get the advanced professional membership. So I'm personally proud of that. I mean, a lot of people looking for editors won't know what that means. So, but I think that, they look up the CIEP and they look on their website, they'll quickly see what it is, and what that entails. So I think it's definitely something that's worth showing off about.
Right.
And definitely if people are starting out, if they're based in the UK especially, or working in British English primarily, definitely look into the CIEP training and membership. That was where I did my initial training, and they're really good.
I was going to say, when I found you and I was going through your resume and your website, I saw that, and then I went to the CIEP's website and started to kind of go over that. And it almost seems like its own college curriculum, the way it's structured and the way you really do have to progress.
Yeah, and they run a lot of training courses that you can take at any time. So you have to do a certain amount to get your membership, but then you don't sort of just stop learning. You can carry on, you can do other courses. They run courses, they've got publications, they've got a members forum that's very helpful, and all sorts of things, resources on there. And they've got a directory, so once you're a member, you're in their directory. You have to be a professional member of us to be in the public directory. But then people can search for you on there and search for editors with certain specialisms. And, you know, I've had a bit of work from that directory as well. And you get to know other editors, and it's sort of like it forwards networking, and you can chat on the forums, you can follow each other on social media. And then if they've got a vacancy or a piece of work comes to them that's not really in their wheelhouse, but it is in yours, they might pass it on to you or ask you whether you want to take it on, and vice versa. Like if you're booked up and someone's got an urgent job that needs doing now, you can pass it on to a colleague, and you get a feel for how other people do things, and, you know, what's the done thing, and, you know, which things are rigid and which things are, in which way the language developing and moving on. Yeah, really helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that was one of the things where, you know, when you're looking for a professional to assist you, you want to see that they have their own skin in the game, they have their own investment. And so, yeah, that was one of the big things where it's like, okay, Catherine's a part of this organization, there's requirements. So, you know, this says a lot about her, the fact that she's dedicated to this. So congrats
and I think,
on reaching that
thank
advancement.
you. Look at someone's CV and see what training they've done as well, because if all their training dates are sort of more than 10 years ago or something, they haven't done anything for ages and ages. I mean, I try and do at least something each year, hopefully more. Then, you know, and check that out, because, you know, you should be keeping your skills up to date. It doesn't necessarily have to mean a formal course. It could be reading books about editing, podcasts and blogs and stuff, watching YouTube videos, but you should be doing something to keep your skills up to date, not just resting on your laurels from your training 10 years ago.
Awesome. Well, so Chad, I think I only got one or two questions that are going to go by real quick. So if you guys have anything else you'd like to ask Catherine, go ahead and put it in the chat. So Catherine, do you do free sample editing for people who are, you know, wanting to get a feel for your approach to it? And if you do, what are your availabilities coming up for right now if someone wants to reach out and have you do that?
Yeah, I do free samples. Not everyone who has a sample becomes a client. I just see it as a lost leader, if you like. You know, it's worth doing. If they're not going to be a good fit, then I probably wouldn't want to work with them anyway. So it's only a win-win situation. So yeah, free samples. I usually have to see the whole book, and I'll pick a random section, literally at random. But I have to see the whole book to just make sure it's all similar in quality and type. And my availability, I can turn samples around within sort of 24 to 48 hours. That's not a problem. At the moment, I still have some slight availability in September, which might be closing in the next few days. Someone's got to get back to me within the next few days. But if they decide not to go ahead, then I might have some availability pretty soon. Otherwise, it's November, my next slot. So.
Okay. And then for someone, just for like reference, I normally tell people about 100,000 words, you can expect about a 4-week turnaround. Is that kind of on average for what you tell people?
Yeah, for a copy edit, I normally allow around a calendar month or 4 weeks. For the average length novel, which is sort of 50 to 100,000 words, I might be able to get a bit more in. If you're talking over 120, it's probably going to take a bit longer, but it depends on what else I've got booked in as well. So I'm squeezing it in September. You know, it might be a bit longer if you're booking ahead for when I've got nothing else booked. Yeah. Developmental editing, I try to allow 6 weeks because that process takes a bit longer. Just needs more read-throughs and stuff and a bit more brain work. But yeah, for the average length novel, I just say 4 weeks, blanket 4 weeks, because as I say, I do work on sort of 2 or more projects at a time as well, so I just sort of weave them in and out of each other. So yeah, it's I sort of prefer to allow a bit of a buffer zone as well. So to be honest, I can say I've never yet, touch wood again, missed a deadline. And I think that's because I do allow quite a generous time slot there, because I really do not want to be in the situation where I'm going back to someone and saying, "Look, I'm going to struggle with this. I'm going to be late." So I prefer to allow quite a while and deliver early if I can.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, hey, it's been such an awesome time, Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us, sharing some insights. And you guys, if you want to reach out to Catherine, all of her information is in the description of the video. So you have access to her Twitter or X account, her website where you can email her directly and look at her rates, and then Instagram and Facebook. They should all be on there. So definitely, you guys will not be sorry to go with Catherine. She's awesome. And I'm excited for October when the Dying Breed Enslavement gets to go over to you.
Yeah, I watched Into the Queue and I was like, oh man, I can't wait until I see season 3.
Yeah, absolutely. It's from my development editors. They said it's the best book so far, but that means that I need to get back to work and finish this other manuscript so I can polish up the manuscript for you. But yes, so everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Catherine, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.